all the way across China to be made available to Beijing and Tianjin and some of the irrigated countryside adjacent to those cities. Another plan is to take water from the lower part of the Yangtze and carry it again across the Yellow River, across the Huanghe, and deliver it to those cities also. Now, the demand for water, especially to provide every Chinese child with a liter of milk, has grown so high that China plans to take water from other sources. So they're going to tap water from the upper end of the Yangtze and divert it into the Huanghe from two different sources. And then to make up the water that then would be denied to the Yangtze, they're going to tap into the Mekong and take water from the headwaters of the Mekong River, which flows on downstream. I'll show you a map of that in a minute, and provides the water resource for many countries downstream. And the most recent addition to the Chinese plan is to dam up the head of the Brahmaputra, where it lies in China, and take that water, divert it into the head of the Yellow River, and deliver it ultimately to the coast, without concern for what will be the consequence of this diversion on water users downstream in the Mekong or for water users downstream in the Brahmaputra. So here's a little map of the Mekong. This is the cutoff to go to the Yangtze. This serves many, many countries all the way down, including Tonle Sap, or Tonle Lake, which is the largest freshwater wetland in Southeast Asia and a very, very important fishery for millions of people who live down this part of the Mekong watershed. The Chinese have not consulted with their neighbors in Laos and Vietnam and Cambodia and Thailand and the rest of it, and they're proceeding straightforward to divert this amount of water. Now here's another map of India, and you can see, here's the Brahmaputra. The Chinese would dam this up right here and deny a piece of that water that flows from this part of India and into Bangladesh. The Indian government is talking about abstracting some of the water that flows into the Indus, which is over here, which is the most important river in Pakistan, and making that available to irrigated agriculture across India. But far and away, the biggest threat to water resources in India right now comes from the intensive irrigated agriculture that is practiced in the Indo-Gangetic Plain. And the rapid growth of India's population has placed such a demand on the food industry, they can no longer raise enough food to feed their people just from surface water. So the Indians have begun extracting groundwater in huge quantities and using groundwater to support irrigated agriculture. And I got this very fuzzy picture recently from a publication by the Indian government. This shows the total number of oil wells between 1986 and 2002 has gone from 5 million to almost 20 million. And it's subdivided into hand gun wells versus tube wells. But the bottom chart is even more interesting to me. The black bar is surface water used in irrigated agriculture. The stippled bar is groundwater used in irrigated agriculture. And this other little bar is other sources. So you see between 1950 and when this thing was published, 2007, there's been this systematic increase in groundwater extraction accompanied by a systematic reduction in surface water applied to irrigated agriculture, and these two curves cross. The rate of extraction of groundwater in India is so severe that the water table throughout the continent is falling at the rate of a meter or more a year. Each year, India removes from storage in the ground 9 billion cubic meters of water. This is enough water extracted from storage in the ground, it will have a measurable effect on the rate of rise of sea level. And this is just India. We're doing the same thing in the high plains of North America. We're doing the same thing back and forth across the arid regions of North Africa. The amount of water being extracted from groundwater delivered to the surface is enormous and does not augur well for the future because we're taking it out much, much faster than it's being replenished. And just to tell you about a couple more. Before the collapse of the USSR, Russia had this grand scheme for diverting water from the northern slope. So the Lena over here, the Yenisei, and the Ob rivers are 3 of the 10 largest rivers in the world in terms of total discharge. And these rivers carry vast amounts of water into the Arctic Ocean, vast amounts of fresh water, And because the fresh water is less dense than salt water, it lies on top of the salt water of the Arctic Ocean. Even when it gets very, very cold, it's not dense enough to sink. So to produce ice on top of the Arctic Ocean, you don't have to cool the entire column of Arctic Ocean water. You just have to cool the top 10, 12, 15 centimeters of fresh water that flows out each year. So as a consequence, the ice forms quickly and covers the surface of the Arctic Ocean, reflects a lot of incoming solar radiation, and is an enormously important player in global climate. What Russia proposed to do was dam the NSA, dam the Ob, dam some of these streams west of the Urals, and reverse the flow of water in these Arctic Ocean streams. Carry that water to regions that are water-starved in southern portions of the former Soviet Union, to the Aral Sea, to the Caspian Sea, to the Volga, to the Danube, etc. It was a massive, enormous plan to redistribute water from the Arctic slope. It has temporarily been shelved with the collapse of the Soviet Union, but the Soviet hydrologic engineers talk all the time about resurrecting it. And then just one more example, and I'll stop soon, though. One more example. This is northern Quebec, on the east side of Hudson's Bay. This is the La Grande watershed. This is territory that belongs primarily to the Cree Nation, the Cree Indians, and a few other tribes. But the government of Quebec has gone ahead and dammed up put many dams on the La Grande River. The black lines are the dams that are already built. The blue cross-hatched region are reservoirs that have been produced. The red bars are dams under construction as of 2009. The orange bars are dams that are planned. And these dams are being put in place not because Quebec needs the water, but Quebec does have enough water farther south, but they need the energy. They need the hydropower that's generated by these dams. And this has been a very, very important component in the Quebec economy since these dams were put in place. Now, the Cree Indians were dispossessed. Many of the village sites were buried underneath this water, but this is still territory that belongs to the Cree Indians. So in the most recent, the 1995 referendum that was announced to determine whether or not Quebec would secede from Canada, the Cree Indians let it be known to the Quebecois that if Quebec seceded from Canada, the Cree Nation would secede from Quebec. They take their water with them. Nonetheless, the 1995 referendum, 49.4% of those who voted said oui to secession, and 50.6% said no. So this kind of self-destructive behavior that we've come to expect from Washington is not limited to the South End. So those are just some examples, and as I said, I could go on forever. I have pages and pages of other examples of mismanaged watersheds around the world, but this is enough for the time being in order to get us toward a discussion of what we do about this. There are certain solutions that can be considered. We can expand the supply, we can reduce the demand. I hang out with the Wharton people enough to know it's all about supply and demand. Or alternatively, we can make enormous strides if we reform the global food industry. Now we can expand the supply by continuing to exploit traditional sources, interbasin transfers, groundwater extraction. Those are short-term, temporary measures that will not have any long-term value in providing enough water for a growing human population. I've crossed out interbasin transfers. No, groundwater extraction has to stop. But desalination is a very important hope for the short-term and long-term future. A very high proportion of the global population that is desperate for water that is very close to the ocean. And the technology of desalination improves by leaps and bounds with each passing year. We will see a much, much larger proportion of the world's at least domestic water generated by desalination. It's still not inexpensive enough to justify using seawater after desalination in irrigated agriculture. And then we will see resurrected again the notion that we should capture icebergs. Icebergs that have calved off the Antarctic continent and are floating around in the Southern Ocean are purified water, distilled water, frozen out of the atmosphere, completely devoid of contaminants, of industrial pollutants, of E. coli, of human sewage. It's as pure as any water we could get. This suggestion was offered as early as the 1950s. This is a picture from the Time Life book, The Sea, published in the early 1950s, in which it was proposed that we would tow individual icebergs from the Antarctic, tow them across the Antarctic current, deliver them to sites in the southern hemisphere, and just take off the water as it melted. The trouble with this solution is that the people who need the water are in the northern hemisphere. And the southern hemisphere is much more sparsely populated, and it's not where the crucial water resource crises of the future will occur. But it is a very, very substantial source of water, and I think we'll see this idea resurrected in the years to come. Then we can reduce demand. We can conserve water, we can improve irrigation technology, not just stop the leaks, not just stop the evaporation, but incorporate lots and lots of other strategies like drip irrigation. Most of the strategies that would be used to improve irrigation technology, I'm sorry to say, Sylvia, will make the acequias system obsolete. Because the water will be used in very, very different ways. We'll apply water directly to plants, and we'll in the process avert losses. We have to also reduce industrial consumption, but that's not a big play. And one thing that we have to learn to do is to reuse gray water and reuse raw sewage to a much greater extent than we do today. Israel today is a leader in the reuse of wastewater. About 35% of the irrigation water that Israel puts in their fields today is treated wastewater. They're doing that because they have to, because the water supply in that country is so limited. And then we will find out we have to reform the global food. We'll improve the irrigation practices, which I just talked about. We'll eat lower in the food chain, and we will learn not to move water, but to move food. And we'll improve the food crops, we'll select drought-resistant varieties, and we'll engineer higher photosynthetic efficiency amongst the plants that we decide to use. This is my least favorite billboard. Not only did this young woman spend 3,000 times the wholesale value of water that she got in that bottle when she bought it, but she's wasting it. And we don't know how many takes the photographer had to make in order to get just the right picture of that girl splashing herself with a bottle of Dasani water. And you can bet your boots they didn't fill that thing up at the tap. So I'll stop now, Laura. A lot more than I could say, but I won't.